Each year, Deloitte publishes Tracking the Trends, which discusses the forces that will be shaping the mining and metals sector for the next 12 months. 2024 sees the publication of the 16th edition, and in this two-part series, we'll chat with a number of Deloitte specialists for more insights into the report. The series was recorded at Deloitte's Cape Town office as part of the Investing in African Mining Indaba. This is episode 1, in which we take a high-level look at the report, as well as the themes of unlocking value and how the sector can prepare itself for the move to net zero. Now, over to our host.
Hi there, my name is Temizo Pakati, Director within our Deloitte Consulting business, and we're excited to again discuss some of the use cases as well as case studies that we've seen through this research. At this time, I'd like to hand over to Ian, who's going to give us an overview of the history of the trends, where it comes from, and the impact it has on our communities as well as the mining clients or the industry as a whole.
Yeah, thanks very much. Ian Sanders, Global Mining and Metals Sector Leader for Deloitte. Really excited to be here and to be talking to you about our 16th edition of Tracking the Trends. Tracking the Trends talks about many things, and if I try and summarise that, we talk about, at the very top of the apex, the organisation's purpose and how that purpose translates into trust and how important trust is within the fabric, the ecosystem, the community, the suppliers, employees and so forth of the organisation for the business to be successful. The trends also go into growth, and we explore growth on a number of different angles. We need more exploration in mining and metals. It's absolutely critical for our sector's success and for us to enable the global economy to grow in terms of population, but also to go through the climate change goals that we all have. That growth then also leads into M&A, and also look at the different commodities that we have in terms of our portfolio choice. Growth also actually moves into productivity, because of course continuous improvement and productivity is another big trend that we've got, and how do you really unlock some of those bottlenecks? In unlocking those bottlenecks, we've got new technology, such as Gen AI, that we also discuss. And we take another look at efficiencies that might be gained by outsourcing or co-sourcing some of the different work activities, not the traditional models of back office only, but more forward-thinking models about how can two organisations or an ecosystem come together and partner.
Also part of the conversation is Louis Kruger, Deloitte Africa's Energy, Resources and Industrials Industry Leader.
From an Africa perspective, all of these trends are applicable, whether it is around growth, which Africa desperately needs, talking to infrastructure, talking to M&A activity. And I think one of the big things that's coming out of this is collaboration between governments and private sector and other ecosystem players in order to facilitate mine development on the continent.
I might start with trust, if I can.
Sure, go ahead.
And this is really interesting, and I've had a couple of conversations with different organisations who have come to Deloitte and they've said, Deloitte, we need critical minerals for the next 10 to 20 years. Help us find them. And I've got a checkbook. So this is real, right? And I've got a big checkbook. And it's like we've got the answer to everything, right? What they're not understanding in that initial question is establishing trust amongst the different partners that are going to be required in order to enable them to have those critical minerals so that they can grow and go through their different goals. So in one of those situations, I actually sat down with the organisation. I said, look, we can take you to different mining companies who may or may not be interested in talking to you about their investment in different countries. But I said, first, we actually need you to establish a thought piece, really, or a narrative around why should these organisations, why should these mining companies trust you? How can you be part of their broader ecosystem? How can you make their communities and their network richer and more purposeful as a result of partnering with you? And those that went, aha, actually then went away and thought about it and came back with a much more considered view in months' time. Others were just like, no, I've got money to spend and I've got the checkbook, let's go and have the meetings.
Yeah.
And you can guess what would have happened.
Yeah.
Those that were more successful in having second, third, fourth meetings, and those who were successful in securing that supply chain were those that really took the time to get to know the organisation and how they can work together. So trust is really important when we think about mining.
I think in the trust component links a lot of the other trends together. If I just think about Trend 5, for instance, it talks about regulatory reform and permitting and all of those sort of things. If one just thinks about what will be required to support the energy transition in the longer term, how many more mines we would need and all of those sort of things. And one of the big constraints that we see is that it takes around 16 years for a new mine to come online. And it is required that we have a look at the regulatory framework and how quickly we can, and how efficient the bureaucracy can be in approving those permits and licenses to help us ensure that we get those mines online. There's no shortcuts that needs to be taken, but there is some interdepartmental optimizations that can be done. And I think from a South Africa perspective, the new cadastral system that's been awarded, I think is very encouraging because it's going to create a lot of transparency and also create a bit of a visibility of where these applications are in the process.
Talking about the skills as well, it's not just AI technology, but what does that do to augment the skills, not just on exploration, but also around the sector as well?
I think mining is moving into an era where there's going to be a lot of technology, a lot of cutting edge type of things that the engineers and scientists will be involved in. I think for me, the challenge globally is just how do we attract young people into the industry. And I think that's what the industry is grappling with at the moment in terms of how do we invest and make sure that we attract young people to make careers out of mining.
Skills is a real interesting one. What we're finding with skills is that organisations are having to consider what skills are going to be needed in 3, 4, 5, 6 years' time. Yeah. And that's really important to start planning now. So, of course, we don't want to lose the people we've got, but we want to recruit and retain more people.
Yeah.
So in doing so, you actually need to assess the skills that are going to be required, not the jobs that are going to be required. What are those skills? Yeah. So you start looking at those, let's call them sun-setting skills. What are those skills that are going to dissipate over time that we can replace with the sun rising, new skills? Yeah.
The next topic is arguably one of the biggest in Tracking the Trends 2024, operational efficiency and unlocking value. For this part of the conversation, we have 2 new guests.
Hi everyone, great to be here. Mark O'Connor, so I'm a consulting partner based out of London. I run our energy and resources practice.
Yeah, my name's Simon van Beek. I'm part of the risk advisory team of Deloitte Africa.
Thanks, Simon. Maybe let me start with you, talking about leveraging to make the best use of infrastructure.
So capital infrastructure choice is critical if you want to attain any form of efficiency, but specifically operational optimizations. The choices that our clients are making these days is becoming extremely important, especially if you think about it from an asset reliability perspective. That's essential, but linked to asset reliability is also the concept of asset integrity.
Yeah.
So the choices you make in your capital infrastructure are going to have an astronomical impact on the performance of your business over time. And I think that's a very important aspect to get right. I would maybe just add to that, there's a lot of aging infrastructure out there. So if you think of your typical pit to port type operation, a lot of that infrastructure is in a phase of refurbishment.
Yeah.
These are big capital projects, complex. And I think data has a large part to play in that.
I'm glad you mentioned data because, Mark, I'm going to ask you the question around getting data-driven insights to understand the age of the infrastructure and also to unlock value using that data. How important is data-driven insights?
So absolutely super important. We need really good data so that we can understand performance of assets and how the business is doing. We saw in 2022 that the operating costs of the 40 biggest miners increased by over 5%. You know, tackling this area and making small reductions is going to drive big improvements. And it's challenging, right? There's so much new technology on a mine site now that data is coming from every angle. One thing we see with our clients is really spending the time up front to really think through which of the data is important, how do we structure it, what are the KPIs we're going to look at on a mine site to make sure we're enhancing the uptime, we're improving value. So it's a really important thing to get right.
Mark, assuming the data is there, do you field. We've got the right set of skills to actually mine the data, manipulate, analyze the data.
I think the industry's on a journey. I mean, there is a real scarcity around the number of data scientists around, and every industry wants more data scientists because I think everyone has recognized the importance of data. So absolutely, I think we're on a path, but I think most of the major mining companies in particular have invested in data and data science and getting those skills into the organization. But it's now about how do we embed that in the way of working.
Simon, I want to talk to you a little bit about, I see other organizations are creating digital twins and predictive maintenance to try and understand the health of the infrastructure. Do you see this a lot within your clients, and then what's the trajectory?
So my view on that is that there's different levels of maturity. A digital twin makes all the sense in the world, especially if you want to look for points of optimization.
Yes.
So to give you a good example of that, I would definitely say the energy transition is a good driver for that. We're in a situation, certainly across Africa at the moment, that the energy transition between now and 2050, for example, is going to exceed over $1 trillion for the continent.
Yeah.
That's a lot of capital infrastructure spend. So the question is, how do you do that smarter? How do you do that more efficiently? And then I would also add in there that if you think about that level of transition and what that means in terms of operational efficiency and optimization for the mining sector, there are a ton of capital projects that are going to have to be implemented. And here's the issue. More than 2/3 of those capital projects fail on time and cost. That's according to PMI anyway, but that means if you work it back to your $1 trillion spend between now and 2050, we've got a huge cost of failure if you apply traditional thinking.
So it makes business sense to actually inject capital early.
Exactly.
Early enough.
Exactly, but this is where the digital twins become pivotal, is that you can mimic exactly what your operations are and make those definitive tweaks and test it in a digital twin environment.
Yeah.
And then actually go and implement it efficiently.
Yeah. Predictive maintenance is quite important, but why are clients or just mining organizations generally not investing in those kinds of assets?
My view there is that it's been done a certain way for decades. And to make that mental operational transition, we were talking about people and what that means in this equation. I don't want to call it a resistance to change factor, but if you're used to a certain linear process, and that's what's been done for decades, to go and augment and change that can become quite a challenge.
Yeah.
Our tracking the trends topic as well is around how can you get the best out of new assets as well. So when we look at the capital infrastructure that you rely on for operational performance, I think it's very important to note that expenditure choices are changing. Yeah. So it always used to be CapEx, OpEx, right? That's the conversation. Yeah. But actually that's boring. Things have changed. Yeah. We're now talking about augmentation expenditure and replacement expenditure within that spectrum. And that's where I think people element really does become important.
I think one of the things we've seen is this journey from being reactive in maintenance in particular to being predictive and prescriptive using machine learning and AI to really drive better performance. I think if you can flip from, let's say, having high proportions of reactive maintenance to much lower numbers, that's a lower cost way to run your business. It's more controlled. You can manage it more with the workforce you have rather than calling people in to fix an emergency. So that's, we worked with a client that was trying to really shift the dial from reactive to predictive maintenance. And I think technology is going to help to get us to prescriptive.
Yeah, Mark, I want to read you something I saw that mining and metals companies are facing declining grades in metals like iron ore, rising operating costs. In 2022 alone, operating expenses at the 40 leading companies increased by 5.5%. How do you create balance between spend on CapEx and also, because now the commodity prices are actually going down, how do you create balance, making sure that you become profitable? Ultimately.
Simon was touching on this. I think there's a really big trade-off between CapEx and OpEx. It's interesting. If I look at some adjacent sectors in the UK, we start to talk about Totex. We start to talk about whole life cost. And I think that's the holy grail here, to actually think about when you're creating an asset, the operational aspects of an asset are the output of the capex and the quality of the assets that Simon was talking about earlier. So thinking about this in a really intelligent, informed way up front is crucial to sort of drive value through the whole life of the asset. So I think making those investment decisions with the right time horizons is really key. And then once you're into operations and times are tough and the ore grades are getting tougher and falling, then it is about just being really good at knowing how the operations are performing. We have an alliance with McLaren in the UK, and that's a fantastic example of how to use data, real-time information on a race car to actually optimize performance so that you can make decisions for the next lap.
Yeah.
We have the computing power now to be able to do that in mining and other industries. And so we have a great opportunity to harness that. But you've got to get the underlying data right and be clear on what you want to measure and improve.
Simon, I read somewhere that visualizations and systems and simulations are one thing, but what about process efficiency? Is there something that clients in this industry can do around optimizing processes first before they can think of technology?
Yeah, this is actually crucial because when you look at the full integrated value chain of any mineral, you really need to get those what we call handshakes correct. If we start at a pit, for example, there's a point at which you would cross that mineral to your freight rail. That freight rail now needs to get to wherever your destination is. And at some point, there's a port that you would now offload and then get to the vessel. That, as an example, whilst it sounds simple, there are so many inefficiencies baked into that integrated operational value chain, costs, volume. And that's really what the game is about at the end of the day. It's about what volume are you getting out. So one way to circumvent that is also to consider an asset management system. And more particularly have an integrated management system approach. The trick is when you merge the physical management system with the data, with the people. If you can bring that together in a proper integrated manner, for sure there's opportunities to create efficiency.
Mark, you were talking about this being a journey. We can achieve it over time, and also making sure that we've got the right skills in the system to make sure that people take advantage of data-driven insights. But I was going to ask both of you around ensuring the quality of the data that comes through before you make any data-driven decisions. So
I've been grappling with this very challenge. So again, coming back to the integrated operations value chain approach, it's not just the quality of the data, it's the availability of the data. You would think that the various ways in which you monitor your infrastructure is available, but the integrity of that data is not as forthcoming as you would want, which makes predictive operational efficiency that much more difficult. And that really becomes an issue. If you're trying to get the best out of your equipment, that data credibility is an issue.
There's a lot of opportunity here, and most of the miners are really good at understanding their operational performance, but using technology, getting the people to work more effectively with that to drive the value from it is as important as the technology itself.
There's almost no conversation that can be had today in business that doesn't include the topic of climate change. It's unsurprising, then, that working towards net zero is part of Tracking the Trends 2024, with a focus on building capacity and future-proofing ESG strategies for a credible transition. So, we're talking ESG in this final part of the episode, as well as trend number 10 on the list, agility and competitiveness. Ian Sanders is back in the hot seat and is joined by Jan Herbst, a member of the Risk Advisory Business in Africa, along with Chief Sustainability Officer for Deloitte Africa, Ashley Theophanides.
We'll start with you, Ashley. I'd like to know how important it is to have purpose-driven kind of businesses within the sector, especially as it relates to climate action.
Often, if we think about the word purpose, it's quite a loaded question and quite a loaded term. And very often we aren't very clear in terms of what purpose is. Now, for me, purpose is reason for existence. It is not a bolt-on. It is something at the core of our strategy. It is at the core of our business, and it allows us to have a social license to operate. And whether that is from a community perspective, because we know within the mining sector, communities are critical in order to create a workforce, in order to drive the broad sustainable development goals, but also our ability to create that level of influence as well as a sustainable growth over time. I do think that often when we focus on sustainability, we tend to be very focused on elements of natural sustainability, which touches on the way in which we conduct our operations and how we influence the environment. But it's also incredibly important to focus on other aspects such as social responsibility, which is in terms of building up the communities. It's about getting the communities involved, upskilling, thinking about the future of our continent and the high level of skilled resources we're going to have access to. But in order to do that, we need to invest in order for the whole ecosystem to be financially sustainable.
I'm glad to mention that actually, because I saw somewhere that purpose-driven organizations tend to outperform their competitors. It's probably because of those kinds of things that you've just mentioned. Are there other examples that you could share with us why purpose-driven organizations seem to be so successful?
So I think there are many reasons for that. Firstly, they are able to attract the best talent. Gen Zs and millennials have indicated that that is one of their key aspects that they consider before they take a job. So many organizations in similar fields have similar core statements, values, but those that are true to that reason of existence, which is your purpose, are able to resonate with the youth. I think in addition to that is that if you take an approach of identifying the various sustainable development goals and how each part of your operations and each initiative that you drive links to making a real impact across the board, because, just focusing on one, such as skills development, but then destroying the natural environment is not a good thing to do. So finding a way in which one can work in harmony is absolutely critical. And the only way that you can do that is through collaboration and bringing together ecosystems of stakeholders to drive that together, because it isn't just one organization. It's about bringing the whole ecosystem together.
To work in harmony.
100%. And the reason why this is so critical is that in the past, I think our focus has been about taking data, transforming that into information, and then driving business value. And that is still something that we have today. But actually, organizations that will be successful in the future are ones that are able to capitalize, monetize, as well as transform the way in which they use their influence. And influence is created through having trust, which is driven through your purpose.
Can I build on that? Part of that ecosystem in Australia, the top 100 companies' CEOs all got together and formed the Climate Leaders Coalition. And in this coalition, they were all openly sharing the challenges that they were facing into, but also the opportunities that they had and the success. And that open forum of sharing and understanding and being empathetic to one another around the different things that they needed to achieve from a climate challenge perspective really did bear a lot of fruit. And that organisation, that group of people kept coming together and sharing, networking in little pods around the key issues that they were facing into. And I just thought that was an amazing group of people to be able to do that in an open and transparent way in order to help us get to our net sustainable, net zero goals.
Now, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about this trend number 10 around agility and competitiveness. Maybe the comparison between agility and value. Are you seeing a positive correlation for those companies that are very agile and that they unlock value much quicker than competitors?
We are definitely seeing skill shortages. We talked a lot about new technologies that are emerging throughout the sector, throughout the globe, basically. And what it means to the mining companies is that they need to be, as you said, agile, and they need to ensure that they adapt to these changes that are happening in the environment. So what we're currently seeing is there's a lot of outsourcing happening in certain areas, specifically around cyber. We talked a lot about data and analytics, and we have this huge amount of data that we need to analyze. And also things like ESG reporting has become critical for most of these businesses. What we're seeing is what we call a third-party delivery models, where the mining companies or companies in general are starting to look at where can they get that skill from in the market because they don't have that skill in-house. Or because of the fact that the environment is changing so quickly, they can't retain those skills. So it's critical for them to remain competitive is to go get that skill somewhere in the market through these third-party delivery models to ensure that they remain competitive and add the maximum value to their clients as well.
How is geopolitical issues or challenges impacting the supply chain? And isn't that kind of slow down companies around agility?
We saw the supply chain issue already emerging after COVID, where it's been probably one of the top risks within any business. And I think that's what makes this more important for companies to look at these third-party delivery models on how they can get the skills within the business. It's just becoming more and more important for most companies, and especially mining companies in this era that we live in, to ensure that they remain competitive, leading edge around most of these technologies.
Supply chain resilience is actually a really good example of that third-party delivery model, where you are outsourcing to an external vendor their analysis and their aggregation of information and data with respect to the total value chain of a particular operation. So organisations typically don't have access to all of that information and data themselves, but going to an external body who focuses on that is a good way. And secondly, what I really like about the third-party delivery models that we're seeing today is that often they're co-sourced. So it's not just let's throw it over the fence and let someone else do it for us, but how can we work together so that both combined can get a better delivery model and we can be agile around the resources that are needed. For example, with respect to ESG, GreenSpace is an engine that we actually have created that looks at all of the innovative technologies with respect to green technology and accumulates them and aggregates them from a whole lot of different sources. So there's thousands of new innovators that are sitting out there that we've aggregated, and we're taking this to clients.
I'm glad you touched on ESG, because there's a question for you actually around ESG. Mining and metals companies need to move beyond tackling emissions as a standalone, but about approaches around mitigating climate change. Are we seeing enough in the sector around clients moving towards those approaches?
Well, I believe organizations, given their shareholders, given the regulatory environments, need to approach this in such a way to follow where the money is, because they need to be financially sustainable, but ultimately addressing the regulatory as well as governance aspects in order to attract capital. Now, we know that mining companies play a significant role in accessing and providing the resources and minerals that are needed for our transition. Without them, it's going to be incredibly difficult for us to achieve what we need to achieve. And this is where the ability for mining companies to continue to provide the resources that's needed for the transition, as well as adopting responsible practices. Which includes the use of things such as data and AI and Gen AI to be able to change the way in which we conduct, the way in which we do exploration, for example. How do we use that so that the impact on our environment is limited, while then bringing new skills on board in order to ensure that we support our growing youth on the continent, as well as ensure that we have jobs for them to do, because the world will be depending on the workforce from Africa in the future. And hopefully the mining industry can spearhead those initiatives.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Deloitte Tracking the Trends 2024. In episode 2, we'll be joined by more Deloitte team members and we'll track more of the trends for the mining and minerals sector. If you'd like to see the report yourself, you can download it using the link in the show notes. And if you found this episode informative or interesting, please share it with your colleagues.